this week, I am going to start with our new lesson, which is all about sound. So let's start. For sound, our learning objectives, of course, is to describe the characteristics of sound using the concepts of wavelength. And we will know later on, ano nga ba yung wavelength at paano natin madedetermine ang wavelength ng isang sound? What is velocity in terms of sound? And lastly, what is amplitude? So let's start. Sabi niyo dito, by definition, sound is a wave. And if you will see, lalo na sa water, tulad nitong nakikita ninyo, kapag parang if you dip your finger in a bowl of water, you will see that there is this rippling effect that is actually caused by the vibration. Yung vibration na yon, nagsimula yon doon sa finger mo na nag-dip doon sa water. And sound actually is very similar to the rippling in the water. It's how it always starts with an object that is vibrating. And because of this vibration, the wave of the sound is transmitted from one location through another through a medium. So tatandaan natin lagi na when it comes to sound, it always needs a medium. So the medium in which it can move from one location to another, it can be in terms of solid objects. So solid objects can create sound and it can transfer sound. At the same time, it can also be transmitted via liquid objects. At the same time, yung pinaka-common na medium na ginagamit ng sound for transmission is of course air. So for example, right now, I am in a classroom and I am speaking. So the sound that I am creating, the vibrations made because of the sounds that I am creating is being transmitted through air. So yung mga nandun sa harap ng, for example, if I am in front of the classroom, even the students at the back, they can hear what I am going to say or what I am saying because the vibrations or the sound waves are being transmitted through air. So nagta-transfer siya or nagmo-move siya from the front of the classroom going to the back of the classroom. Okay? So sabi niya dito, a wave or a sound wave is produced by a vibrating object. And then this vibration transfers from one location to another and the transmission occurs in a medium which can be a solid, it can be a liquid, or the most common medium for sound transmission is through air. So let's continue. So sabi niya dito, sound waves are actually mechanical waves and they travel longitudinally. So when we say longitudinally, ibig sabihin, our sound waves, they are moving up and down, up and down, up and down. So this is an example of what a sound wave looks like. Okay? And sabi niya dito, because of the vibration, there are particles, tatandaan natin, in our solid, di ba? We learned in elementary that solid actually have what we call as molecules. And di ba sabi natin, yung molecules in solid objects, they are very compact or they are very close to each other. Whereas yung mga particles or molecules in a liquid substance, they are a bit far away from each other. And then yung mga particles or molecules in gaseous substances such as air, they are very far from each other. So tatandaan natin na yung mga different mediums natin, they are composed of particles or what we call as molecules. And these particles are very important, necessary sila for the transmission of sound. So yung, for example, you have a vibrating object and for example, your vibrating object is here. The vibration will transfer to another particle. So for example, this is a gaseous substance, so medyo malayo-layo yung kanilang particle from each other. So mas mabilis yung transmission ng sound from one particle to another. Nakarating na siya agad doon sa back of the classroom because the particles in air are far away from each other. So mas mabilis yung transmission ng vibration. Okay? So pag na-transfer na siya doon sa next particle, so sabi nga niya dito, it's going to disturb the particles next to them. So yung vibration originally from this particle is now transferred doon sa katabi niyang particle and then matatransfer ulit doon sa susunod na katabing particle. So that's how the sound waves are transmitted from one location to the next. Okay? Sabi niya ganon, this is how we create a wave that propagates. So for example, yung isang wave, na-reach niya na yung particle na yon, it will go down, and then it will transfer to the next particle, and then it goes down and transfers to the next particle again. Okay? And because of this movement of transferring from one particle to another, it causes the wavelength some of the wavelength to move closer to each other and some of the wavelength to move away from each other. So kung meron kayong slinky sa bahay, are you familiar with slinkies? Taas ang kamay, sino ang may slinky or alam kung ano ang slinky? Ayan, so si Jared ay nagtaas ng kamay. Sige, i-share ko. This is what a slinky looks like. Laruan siya usually ng mga bata. Okay, and alam ko nilalaro-laro nyo yan or papababain nyo dun sa hagdan, di ba? A slinky is a very good example of a sound wave propagating. So kung matatandaan ninyo, kung kayo ay merong slinky at pinababa nyo yung slinky mag-isa sa hagdanan, kung mapapansin nyo, as the slinky moves down doon sa hagdanan, some of the parts of the slinky are compressed or are closer to each other. Pero, for example, pagbaba niyang ganun, di ba, mas nagko-compress yung nasa ilalim. Tapos yung nasa taas, medyo they are far away from each other. So yun yung, anong tawag dito, medyo refracted sila from each other and then bababa ulit siya doon, mag-move ulit yung slinky doon sa other side. So, ganun din yung ating sound waves. Yes po.
Sure, it just goes back and forth.
Yes, of course. It just goes back and forth. The same when it comes to sound, lalo na kapag enclosed yung area, yun yung dahilan kung bakit nagkakaroon ng echo. Kasi enclosed yung area, ibig sabihin, the vibration just moves back and forth. Kaya yung sinabi mong word, paulit-ulit niyang uulitin, or yun yung tinatawag nating echo, or nag-e-echo yung sound. It only happens if the area is enclosed. Pero kapag hindi enclosed yung area, syempre, hindi na babalik yung sound. It will continue propagating palayo ng palayo doon sa area. Hanggang sa mawala na yung vibration. Okay, so let's continue. So sabi niya dito, if the waves are very close to each other, then this is what we call as your compression. Okay, so they are moving towards each other. For example, the wave is going in this direction. So syempre, sa simula, nandito yung compression. The remaining part of the wave, syempre, normally layo-layo sila. And then this compression will travel along doon sa length ng ating wave. So from here, matatransfer on the next side yung compression, yung originally compressed na sound waves, they will move away from each other. And that is what we call as your rarefaction. Okay, so this is what a wave or a sound wave looks like. Okay, balikan natin tong idea na to later on, ha? Can a sound exist in a vacuum or empty space? Pag-isipan nga natin yung question na yan. And then babalikan ko kayo kung ano yung magiging sagot natin dito. Can sound exist in a vacuum or in an empty space?
Ano yung rarefaction?
Rarefaction is when the waves are far away from each other. They are moving away from each other. So ito yung part ng slinky na nasi-stretched out yung part ng slinky. Di ba pag nilalaro mong ganon, pag ginanya mo yung kamay mo, nandito yung compression sa side na to. But the side here, they are far away from each other. So yun yung rear fraction. Pagka nag-move ka naman ng kamay mong pag ganon, the compression will move from this hand going to the other hand. So nandito na yung compression. The other parts now are in rear fraction. Okay? So balikan natin to. Sulat nyo tong question na to and then we are going to answer it later on when we finish our discussion. Is it possible for sound to be created and to be transmitted in an empty space or in a vacuum? Or sabihin mo ng in a black hole. Kasi a black hole, di ba, is very similar to vacuum. It's basically an empty space. So do you think sound can be created in that kind of situation and can sound be transmitted in that kind of situation? So again, the question is, can sound exist in a vacuum or empty space? Write it down and then we are going to answer the question later on before we finish our discussion. And then if you have ideas na on answers to this question, you can jot it down or you can write it in your notebook, and then later on I will be giving you time to present your ideas on this question. Okay, so let's continue. This part of the slide, again, paki-copy sa inyong mga notebooks. So this is the parts of a longitudinal wave. And the parts of a longitudinal wave is very important kasi later on, when we learn the different concepts or the characteristics of a sound waves, specifically in terms of wavelength, kanyang velocity or speed, at saka yung kanyang amplitude, we need the different parts of the longitudinal wave. Okay, so for example, this is a wave. We have different, ano tawag dito? We have the different parts of a longitudinal wave. The highest part of a wave, yung pinakamataas na na-reach ng isang wave, is what we call as the crest. Okay, so the highest part of the longitudinal wave is what we call as your crest. Gitna niya, this is the equilibrium. So the broken line here in the middle is the equilibrium. So coming dito sa gitna ng equilibrium, ang pinakamataas na na-reach nitong ating wave is what we call as the crest. And then opposite the...
Ito ang spell ng ano, Chair? Equilibrium.
Equilibrium. Wait, sige, sulat ko. So the equilibrium is the broken line. Let's continue. So opposite your crest, if crest is the highest part of the wave, then the lowest part of the wave is what we call as your throw. So again, the highest part of the wave is your crest. The lowest part of the wave is your throw. Okay, and then let's continue. We say amplitude if we are going to measure only from the equilibrium going to your crest. So the height from the equilibrium going to your crest is what we call as your amplitude. And then the distance from one crest going to another crest or one throw going to another throw is what we call as your wavelength.
Under kapag equilibrium to hanggang sa throw.
Wala po. It will still be more of amplitude. Pero we measure amplitude from the equilibrium going to the crest. Again, I'm going to clarify yung wavelength. Wavelength is the distance from one crest going to another crest or one throw going to another throw. So meron tayong apat na very important parts of a wavelength or a longitudinal wave, sorry. The first one is the crest, which is the highest part of the wave. Opposite the crest, of course, is your throw, which is the lowest part of your longitudinal wave. And then in the middle, we have the equilibrium. From the equilibrium going to the crest, that is what we call as your amplitude. And then the last one is our wavelength. And the wavelength is the distance from one crest going to another crest or one throw going to another throw. Okay, so in your notebook, I think it will be helpful if you will be draw your own longitudinal wave and then label the different parts of this wave and then have a very short description or definition of what a crest is, what a throw is, what is amplitude, and what is wavelength. So I'll give you time to make your notes about the different parts of the longitudinal wave. Siguro 1 to 2 minutes or 2 minutes, I will give you the time to draw and write your definition.
Teacher, I have a question. Teacher, lahat po ng crest, loop, amplitude, wavelength, saka equilibrium is i-define po lahat, sir? Lahat ng ano sa wavelength po.
Yes po. For you, okay, can I see a raise of hands kung sino pa yung nagsusulat sa kanilang notebooks?
Tapos na pala ako.
Okay, sige. I'll give another minute to finalize your notes. Okay, sige, let's continue. Anyway, this video is recorded and it will be uploaded on YouTube. So kung meron pa kayong missing na definition or description about the different part of the longitudinal wave, siguro just go to YouTube and then replay nyo na lang yung part ng video, recorded video on YouTube so that you can complete your notes. Okay, so I'm going to continue with the different characteristics of a sound. So the first one is the amplitude. And sabi natin kanina, di ba? The amplitude is actually the distance from the equilibrium level So this is the equilibrium level, itong line na to, yung nasa gitna. And then of course, sabi natin, the amplitude is the distance from the equilibrium going to the crest. So yung crest natin, by definition, is the highest part of the wave or the highest reach of the wave. So, in order for us to find the amplitude of a wave, we are just going to start from the equilibrium, and then we are going to measure yung length or distance from this area, which is the equilibrium, going to this area, which is the crest. So in this example, can you tell me what is the amplitude of this sound wave? Anybody from the class? Yes, Kuya Yuri.
Ma'am, 0.30 po.
Kuya, hindi naman siya nag-reach dito eh. Hanggang dito lang yung crest.
Mabala
Yung
sa
length.
0.20 po.
Again?
0.20 po.
And what is the unit of our amplitude?
Y meters.
So, it's meters po. Yung y niya dyan is the y-axis. So, yes, it's 0.20 meters. So, for this wave, ang ating amplitude is 0.20. So, saan niya nakita yon? Nandito siya. Kasi sabi natin, in order for us to find the amplitude, we are going to start with the equilibrium. So, the equilibrium is at 0. And then this is 0.10. And then yung pinakamataas na na-reach, which is your crest, is 0.20. So therefore, my amplitude is 0.20 meters. So kung mapapansin ninyo, throughout the longitudinal wave, iisa yung measurement ng amplitude. So even here, the amplitude is the same, 0.20 meters. Okay? So ano nga ba ang idea when it comes to amplitude? Amplitude kasi is related to the idea of loudness. So kung gaano kalakas ang isang sound or kung gaano kahina ang isang sound is related to the amplitude of the sound wave. So for example here, we have a sound wave here. Ilan ang crest natin? 1, 2, 3, and 4. Pero kung mapapansin ninyo, mababa lang yung kanyang amplitude. Kasi pag measure natin yung distance coming from the equilibrium going to the crest, napakaliit lang. So ito lang siya, maliit lang. Whereas, itong isang wavelength na to, pag binilang natin yung crest, meron din tayong 4 na crest. Pero kung mapapansin nyo, the distance coming from the equilibrium going to the crest is bigger compared to the first longitudinal wave. And this is because the first wave actually has a lower amplitude. Nasa 0.5 meters lang yung kanyang amplitude. Whereas the second wave has a bigger amplitude. Umabot siya ng 3 meters yung kanyang amplitude. Therefore, we can say that this wave, it has a lower amplitude. Therefore, this wave is not loud. It is actually quiet. Whereas the second wave, because it has a higher measurement of amplitude, therefore we can say that this sound is actually loud. So when you are using your phones and when you are listening to music or when you are watching and you are increasing the volume of what you are watching or what you are listening to, what you are doing is you are actually increasing the amplitude of the sound. So itinataas mo yung crest niya para from the equilibrium going to the crest, magiging mataas yung kanyang amplitude and it will make the sound louder. And you have to remember, okay, that in terms of amplitude, not all sounds na merong amplitude, lower amplitude is actually naririnig natin. Diba? There are some sounds na hindi na nadidetect ng ating ears because their amplitude is very low. Pero may mga animals naman such as dogs and cats, mas sensitive yung kanilang ears, therefore they can detect more sounds na mas mababa yung amplitude. So yun yung sinasabi nila na merong naririnig yung mga aso or pusa na hindi natin naririnig. Or sometimes, naririnig nila earlier. Kahit malayo pa yung source ng sound, naririnig na nila kasi mas sensitive yung kanilang ears to detect sounds that have lower amplitudes. Hindi katulad ng tao, medyo limited yung ating sensitivity when it comes to detecting sounds with lower amplitudes. So ang nangyayari, anong tawag dito? Mas nauunang nakakadinig yung mga pets natin. So usually, di ba, malayo pa yung kotse, tumatahol na sila kasi alam na nilang paparating na kayo. Whereas kayo, hindi nyo pa masyadong naririnig yung sound. So medyo late yung nagiging reaction. Okay? So merong mga ganon, may mga sounds na hindi tayo naririnig. It's because they have lower amplitude. So mas mahina yung kanilang sound. Okay? Are we clear about amplitude and the idea of loudness and quietness? Pa-raise ako ng hand kung malinaw yon. Okay, so again let's summarize. Habang tumataas yung crest, mas tumataas yung amplitude, mas lumalakas yung sound. And the opposite applies. Habang lumiliit yung crest, mas...
yung pala yun, Charo, yung para sa mic kotse, nakikita, yung tumataas baba. Yung sa Google Meet, Charo, yan. Yung kulay blue.
Sir, yung parang pagka gano'n, sir, nag-record ka po ng audio, sir, may makikita kang yung ganyan, sir, yung wavelength.
Yes. Yes po. So, depende sa lakas ng boses ninyo kung lalaki yung amplitude, so mas tumataas yung wavelength, di ba? Mas tumataas yung wave kasi mas tumataas yung crest. So, yun yung idea ng loudness. Habang bumababa yung ating crest, bumababa yung amplitude, so mas humihina yung sound. Okay? So, when it comes to the idea of loudness and quietness, syempre, doon lang tayo sa sakto lang. Hindi naman okay na sobrang loud palagi, especially when you are listening to music or when you are watching, tapos naka-earphones pa kayo o kaya headphones. So, it's not actually advisable that you listen frequently to very loud music. Okay? So, kung kayo naman ay naka-earphones or naka-headphones, medyo regulate yung sound or yung amplitude of the sound that you are listening to or you are watching. Kasi syempre, higher amplitude sounds can actually cause damage to our ears. So to take care of our ears, syempre mas okay if we regulate the amplitude of the sound that we are listening to. Yes, Kuya Reynald.
And just lower the sounds by a little bit if you're listening to any loud music.
Yes. Okay. So later on, we will know more of how we can take care of our ear. So ayan yung idea ng amplitude. It actually affects the quietness or the loudness of the sound that we are listening to. So higher amplitude means more, the louder the sound is. The lower the amplitude, the more quiet the sound is. So now let's go to what we call as the frequency of a sound. Okay? So the frequency of a sound is actually refers to the total number of waves per second. So kung napapansin nyo kanina dito sa ating amplitude, pareho yung number of crest. So meron siyang 4 na waves dyan. 1, 2, 3, 4. Dito din, 1, 2, 3, 4. Ang pinagkaiba lang nila is yung taas ng crest. Kasi nga, we are talking about amplitude. But when we talk about frequency, we are now talking about the total number of waves. Gaano kabilis na po-produce yung waves in a given time. So kung mapapansin nyo dito, 1, 2, 3, tatlo lang yung kanyang wave. Pagdating dito sa baba, medyo marami-rami. Ibig sabihin, mas mabilis yung production ng vibration, mas mabilis yung frequency ng sound. So ito ay merong 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 na waves. So yun yung pinagkaiba nila. Yung isa ay tatlo lang yung waves in the same time, which is 1 millisecond. Yung nasa baba naman, nakapag-produce as much as 8 waves in the same time, which is 1 millisecond. So ibig sabihin nun, magkaiba na yung frequency nitong sound sa taas,
1 millisecond lang yun, sir.
sa baba. Again, Kuya Kadesh?
Ganyan yung kadami, sir.
Depende po sa wave. Pwedeng mas madami pa, pwedeng mas konti pa. It depends on the frequency of the wave. Yes, Reynald?
Sure, it's actually almost like
Okay, medyo nag-robotic si Kuya Reynald doon. Anyway, let's continue. So this is the frequency of a sound. And the frequency, the unit for frequency is what we call as hertz, or yung kanyang shortcut, which is a capital H and a lower Z. Okay? So sabi niya dito, frequency is measured through the number of waves per second. So frequency is the lambda, and we compute for frequency by the total number of waves divided by time. So if we're going to compute dito sa sound letter A, for sound letter A, how many waves do we have? Anybody from the class? How many waves do we have in sound letter A?
3 waves.
We have 3 waves. Thank you very much, Kuya Jared. And our time is 1 second. So in order for us to compute for the frequency of sound letter A, we are going to divide 3 divided by 1. So we have 3 hertz for sound letter A. Whereas for letter B, how many waves do we have in sound letter B? Anybody from the class?
8.
We have 8, and we have still the same time, which is 1 second. So for our frequency for sound letter B, we have 8 hertz. So magkaiba yung kanilang frequency. Okay? And sabi niya dito,
Sir, kailangan ba dapat second? Kasi per second nakalagay sa definition.
pag ang nakasulat per second, yes. 1 second naman to, yung kanyang time. Okay? And sabi niya dito, the higher the frequency of a sound wave, the higher the pitch of the sound. And of course, the opposite applies. If the frequency of the sound is low, ibig sabihin, the pitch of the sound is also very low. Okay? So for example, between sound A and sound B, we can say that sound A has a lower frequency. Therefore, sound A will also have a lower pitch. Whereas sound letter B, it has 8 hertz in terms of frequency. So the higher the frequency, it means that sound B has a higher pitch. Okay? So again, ang pinagkaiba ng pitch natin, it depends on how many waves are generated in time. So because in letter B, mas marami siyang waves na na-generate in the same amount of time. Ibig sabihin, mas mataas yung kanyang frequency, mas mataas din yung kanyang pitch. Okay? So yung mga singers natin na kayang umabot ng mga matataas na notes, ibig sabihin, they have the capability to produce more waves in the given time. So kung naabot niya yung mataas na note for that song, ibig sabihin, kinaya ng kanyang vocal cords na mag-vibrate at mag-produce ng ganun karaming waves for that time. Compared dun sa isang tao na hindi niya na-reach or hindi niya naabot yung note doon sa song na yon. Ibig sabihin, yung vocal cords niya medyo mas mabagal in producing the same amount of waves in the same amount of time. Kaya nga singers, they are always practicing because they are building, syempre, yun parang tolerance din, tsaka sinasanay nila yung kanilang vocal cords to produce as much waves as possible within the given time. Okay? Kasi pag nasanay nila yon na mas maraming waves yung napoproduce, ibig sabihin, mas higher yung pitch na kaya nilang i-produce, mas nare-reach nila yung note na dinidemand sa isang song. Okay? Yes, Kuya Yuri.
Teacher, para makuha yung hertz, teacher, dapat i-divide mo yung wavelength tsaka time po?
Yung number of waves, yes, you are going to divide that with the number of time.
Para makuha po yung hertz, teacher?
Yes. Okay.
Sige po, sir. Salamat po.
Okay, so that is the frequency of sound. So if our amplitude is related to the loudness and the quietness of the sound, your frequency is related to the pitch of the sound. So the same then, the lower the frequency, the lower the pitch, the higher the frequency, the higher your pitch. Okay?
Teacher, kaya lang pala ng human na marinig 20 Hz lang.
20
Pag bumaba pa, wala na.
pinakamababa, very low pitch na yon. Pero yung other animals kasi, it depends on the anatomy, yung structure ng kanilang vocal cords. Some animals...
Teacher, dapat kailangan second daw. Bakit millisecond to?
Millisecond, 1 second. Okay na yan.
Hindi, 1,000 milliseconds sa 1 second.
Okay na yan. Okay. In just 1 second. So for other animals, they have different vocal structures, and the difference in the vocal structures allow them to produce different pitch. So tulad kanina sa loudness and quietness, may mga ears, may structure sa ears, yung other animals which allows them to be more sensitive to lower amplitude sounds or to detect sounds with lower amplitude. The same, other animals also have structures in their vocal cords which allows them to produce sounds with lower pitch, okay, or to produce sounds with higher pitch. So hindi lahat ay kayang gawin ng tao, hindi din naman lahat ay kayang gawin ng other organisms. So it depends on they have doon sa kanilang katawan. Next, for this one, let's try to compute for the frequency of this sound wave. So again, for our sound wave, we are going to compute for the number of waves, and then we are going to divide it in terms of the time na na-achieve yung wave na yon. So anybody from the class can tell me what is the frequency of this sound? Anybody? Ano ang frequency nitong ating sound na to?
Sir, can we use calculator?
Yes po.
Teacher, 1.1.
How did we come up with 1.1?
Tatlo ba yan, sir, or dalawa lang? Yung waves. Si Juan.
Sir,
Putol, sir, eh.
Tatlo yan. Tatlo.
0.75 po, sir.
0.75 and 1.1 is wrong. Any other answers?
2.
4.
What are we trying to do?
Please use the equation for the frequency, the number of waves divided by time. The number of waves you compute or you count, and then yung time is given in the x-axis. So what is our frequency? Yes, Reynald. Raise of hands.
2.5.
No, raise of hands. Grade 7. If you have your answers, raise your hand. Yes, Kadesh.
0.75.
No. Yes, Jared.
0.5?
How did you come up with 0.5?
Um,
Malapit na, pero hindi pa din.
God.
How many waves do we have?
3.
3.
3. What is our time?
4.
4 seconds.
Why 4?
1.1.
I told you the time is on the x-axis. What is our time?
10.
10. So what is now the frequency?
Wait, ma'am, 0.3.
0.3.
What?
3.
0.
Oh,
Wait,
0.3 what?
2.2.
What's the unit?
Hertz, ma'am.
Hertz.
And
So our frequency is 0.3 hertz.
Sir, kala ko din yung time sa 4.
I already
Yeah,
told you
the
the time is
forcing
in the x-axis. This is the x-axis. And pinakita naman niya yung time is only from this part going to this part. And if we're going to use 4 seconds, there is only one wave generated in 4 seconds. So if we're going to use 4 seconds, 1 divided by 4. But you counted this, and you counted this. So 10 seconds. Okay? So that is the frequency of our sound. Let's continue now to what we call as the speed of sound. Or for some people, they call it the velocity of sound. Yes, Jared? Before we start.
Oh, I left that hand.
Okay, so you forgot to lower it down. Let's continue to the velocity or the speed of sound. So kanina, in-identify natin yung wavelength, and we said that the wavelength is the distance from one crest to another crest, or from one throw going to another throw. So now we also identified ano yung frequency. And with frequency, we said that we are going to divide the number of waves with the time. So alam na natin mag-identify ng wavelength, alam na rin natin mag-identify ng frequency. And it's important to identify wavelength and frequency because for the speed of sound, we are going to multiply the number of wavelength to the number of frequency. Okay, so nandito yung triangle ulit natin. So for speed, we are going to multiply frequency and wavelength. In turn, if we are going to look for the frequency, we are going to divide speed and wavelength. And if we are looking for wavelength, we are going to divide speed and frequency. So tatandaan natin yan ha. Speed, we are going to divide frequency multiplied by wavelength. Pero if we are going to look for frequency, we are going to divide speed with wavelength. And if we are looking for wavelength, we are going to divide speed with frequency. So paki-take note po itong equations na to in your notebooks. If it will be easier for you to just use the triangle, then that's fine. Pero kung mahihirapan kayo, then anong tawag dito? Please copy the equation here. Speed, ang unit niya is
Hertz.
no, meter. For, wait lang. Papakopya po muna.
Check your master.
Kopya muna ng mga equations na yan. Okay? And then let's have the example here. It says here that a wave has a frequency of 10 hertz. So given yung kanyang frequency, which is 10 hertz, and yung wavelength, which is 30 meters. Again, wavelength is measured from one crest to another crest. So since we are looking for speed, we are just going to multiply 10 hertz to 30 meters. So what's the answer for our speed?
300
300.
Wait lang ah.
hertz per second.
300 hertz per.
Teacher, 300 po.
300
300 hertz per second. Eh,
meters per second.
Yes.
meters per second?
Nakita niyo
Or
mas.
millimeters per second.
So 10 multiplied by 30 is 300 meters per second. Okay, so let's try. I think I have 3 examples here for the
Teacher, bakit ano siya, meters per second pa rin?
Tinalo niya yung speed. Di ba with speed, we use meter per second? Tinalo niya. Okay, let's continue. The second problem here, the speed of sound is 346 meter per second. So given naman yung kanyang speed. If a sound wave travels at a frequency of 55 hertz, what would its wavelength be? So in order to answer this problem, please go back to your triangle, or if you have taken note of the equations given. And then I'm going to give you 2 minutes to answer it. Enough ba yun? Or meron na kayong sagot ngayon? So I'm going to give you 2 minutes to try and answer it. And then we are going to discuss kung ano yung sagot doon sa ating problem. Again, the problem is the speed of sound is 346 meters per second. If a sound wave travels at a frequency of 55 hertz, what would its wavelength be? Your 2 minutes starts now. Wait lang, Kuya Yuri.
Okay, teacher.
So the rest of the students, try ha. You have to try and compute it for yourself. Hindi enough na nanonood or nakikinig lang. You really have to try it to know kung ano yung maling ginagawa ninyo. Okay, our time is up. So now let's answer this problem. So let's first identify ano yung mga values that is already given in our word problem. So the first one is given yung ating speed, which is 346 meters per second. Other than the speed, given din yung ating frequency, which is 55 hertz. So how are we going to come up with the wavelength? Yung wavelength yung ating missing. So sabi doon sa triangle, in order to come up with the wavelength, we are going to divide this speed to what is the frequency. So it will be 346 meters per second, and we are going to divide that with 55 hertz. So what is the answer? Anybody from the class?
6.29 or 6.290.
6.30.
6.29 po, Chair.
What is the unit?
6.29 hertz.
Second po. 6.29 meters per second po.
Mali yung 6.30, 6.29 lang.
6 point...
Kasi sa tabi ng
6.29 hertz.
Sige, sabihin mo lang 6.30.
6.29 lang.
The unit.
Hertz.
Meter per second po.
Mali lahat.
What? Meters
Meters
lang.
per second. Oh, never mind.
Mali lahat.
Oh, just meters?
6.30.
Oh, just meters.
We are measuring the distance from one crest to another crest and the distance from one throw to another throw. So our wavelength is 6.29 meters. Okay? So let's try another problem. So nakuha naman kung paano natin ito compute using what equation. So medyo nalilito lang tayo when it comes to the unit. So let's try another problem. This time, a fisherman notices that one wave passes the bow of his anchored boat every 3 seconds. He measured the wavelength to be 8.5 meters. How fast are the waves traveling? I'm going to give you 3 minutes to answer this problem, and your 3 minutes starts now. Again, the problem is, a fisherman notices that one wave passes the bow of his anchored boat every 3 seconds. He measured the wavelength to be 8.5 meters. How fast are the waves traveling? Okay, finalize your answers. Time is up. So for this one, you have to compute, ang ating given kasi is just the wavelength, which is 8
Walang frequency.
meters. Hahanapin muna natin yung frequency. And in order for us to find the frequency, we are going to divide the number of waves in terms of time. And the number of waves is given naman, and the number of time is also given. So we can definitely compute for the number of frequency. Okay? How many number of waves was given in the problem?
Uno.
So sabi niya dito, napansin the fisherman that there is one wave. So for every one wave, it takes 3 seconds for the wave to pass. So in order for us to compute for frequency, we are going to divide 1 divided by 3. So we come up with, what's the frequency?
0.333.
0.33, what's the unit? What's the unit for frequency?
Hertz.
Hertz. Okay, so now that we have the wavelength and we have the frequency, now we can compute for the speed of sound. So we are going to multiply 0.33 hertz, and we are going to multiply that to the given wavelength, which is 8.5 meters. So now, what is the speed of our sound? Anybody from the class? 0.33 multiplied by 8.5 meters.
2.805.
2.8 or 2.805.
2.105.
2.81. And what is the unit for speed?
Meters per second.
Meters per second.
Okay. So, kailangan makompute nyo muna ng tama yung frequency before you can compute for the actual speed. Sino ang nakakuha ng tama for the frequency? Raise of hands. So, si Reynald.
Reynald po.
So, si Reynald lang ang nakakuha ng frequency, therefore si Reynald lang ang nakakuha ng speed. Tama ba ako?
Yes po, sir.
Okay, so again, you have to analyze the problem. Huwag nagmamadali in answering kung hindi pa naiintindihan yung problem ng mabuti. Kung ano yung given, ano yung kailangan nating i-derive, at ano yung
Pagka tama yung frequency ko, mali lang ako sa speed. Pinag-divide ko siya.
Okay? So again, take time to read and understand the problem first. Kuya Jared, you raised your hand.
That was by accident.
That was by accident. Okay, this is my last problem. It says here that a sound wave in air has a frequency of 262 hertz. And it travels at a speed of 330 meters per second. Now we are going to look for the wavelength of the time. So I'm going to give you 2 minutes to answer this problem, and your 2 minutes starts now. Again, read and understand the problem. Check what is given. Identify what is missing. Okay, time's up. What is the wavelength for our problem? Raise of hands. What is the wavelength of our problem? Sinong nauna?
Si Yuri.
Sabay kasi kada sa theory.
Tadesh, what's your answer?
1.26 or 1.25 meters.
How about Yuri? What's your answer?
0.79 meters.
How about Jared? What's your answer?
1.26.
Okay, so how do we find that? For the wavelength, we are going to divide the speed, which is 330 meters per second. And then we are going to divide that with the frequency, which is 200 hertz. So 330 divided by 262 is equivalent to 1.26 or 1.25. What is the unit?
Meters.
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 1.26.
Question 1.25 pala,
For
sir.
Kadesh and Jared, you got it correctly. Kuya Yuri, raise your hand before you talk and read and understand the problem first. Laging nagmamadaling mag-compute. Okay? Double check muna. Sinasabi ko sa inyo, hindi tayo nagkakarera kung sinong unang makakasagot. What's important is if you get the problem solved correctly. Walang points yung pinakaunang nakapag-solve kung mali yung value, okay? So again, that's how we compute for the wavelength.
So, ano yung sagot ni Yuri?
Balikan nyo yung triangle ninyo para alam ninyo kung anong equation ang gagamitin. Okay? Balikan ninyo yung triangle. Kung hindi pa ninyo natatandaan yung triangle, sauluhin ninyo yung inyong equations. So to end our lesson for today, we are going syempre to come up with ways on how we can take care of your ear. Kasi nga, the ear is our organ for detecting sounds. We can hear because of our ears. And our ear is also related to our balance. So when we are walking, we can walk straight because our ear can detect yung balance na ganun. So if our ear is damaged, most probably yung balance din ninyo will also be damaged. So again, these are very common. This is something that you have learned from preschool pa lang. Your teachers have already been teaching you how to take care of your ear and other sensory organs. So again, the first one is of course to reduce volume. And we all know that the higher the amplitude, the higher the volume is. And medyo napapansin ko na very common sa atin, or especially for people your age, you're always listening to music at a very high volume. So lower it down, especially if you have your earphones or headphones in. No need to have it on full volume kasi nakadikit naman na siya sa inyong mga tenga. Okay? And of course, you use earplugs or earmuffs for very loud music. Even pagka nandun sa very high pressure na areas, yung matataas na lugar, sometimes we have to use earplugs. We all know this. We always use cotton buds, pero it's actually not advisable because cotton buds,
Your ears are ear cleaning.
they're not
Self-cleaning.
cleaning your ears. They're more of pushing the earwax inside of your ear, but not effectively removing it. And sometimes when the earwax are pushed really far doon sa inyong ear, that's when it can cause the damage. So as much as possible, hindi talaga advisable na everyday you use cotton buds to clean your ears. Or it's not talaga advisable to use cotton buds in general. There are other ways of cleaning the ear. Ang suggested talaga ng doctors is that you use a damp towel, yung medyo basa pero hindi naman tumutulong basa. You wrap it around your finger and that's how you clean your ear. So kung mas maliit dyan sa finger ninyo, it's not advisable kasi chances are it will just push the dirt inside of your ear instead of really...
Di ba hindi kailangan ipasok sa tenga?
Yes.
Yung cotton buds. Self-cleaning sila.
Yan sa labas na. Okay? And again, keep your ears dry, especially if you went swimming or you had an activity, water-related activities. Always keep your ears dry. Kasi when water is lodged inside the ear, pag nakapasok siya, it can cause infection inside of the ear. Tatandaan natin, there are bacteria in that water, and bacteria love to live in areas na moist at merong source of water. So chances are dadami yung bacteria inside your ear, it will cause infection. At kapag meron ng infection, syempre you have to consult a doctor on what medication you will be taking. Wag bastang inom ng kahit anong medication. You are not a doctor.
Vicks.
And do not self-medicate. Do not diagnose or prescribe medications for yourself or for other.
Number 1 healing, sir.
Always
Vicks.
go to your doctor. Kapag may napapansin kayong different, parang kakaiba yung pandinig niyo on this side, always consult a doctor. Kung mayroong kailangang tanggaling bara, they will be removing it. So wag niyong i-push using yung cotton buds.
Siya pumutok na yung eardrum ko.
Grade 7, pero we don't have enough time na. So I'm going to cut this class short.
Yes,